Well, because I immediately explained that I had been fooled by these people, and that I really had expected the money to go to ending poverty and stopping environmental destruction, and not to financing another round of war.
I mean, let's just stop for a minute here and say this, just to reiterate that you're saying that you're personally responsible for $2.1 trillion ending up in the hands of the Bushes.
Yeah, but I didn't know that.
Wow.
And so we had to squish that money all, freeze it.
So they didn't actually get it.
Well, they got it, and as soon as we saw where the money went, we froze the account.
Oh. Now you're saying that as a result of you realizing that you'd been double-crossed and how upset you were, that this
a lot of people in the U.S. and England then started giving me information about the Queen, and she's got a lot of dirty laundry they've been blackmailing her about. Diana was pregnant with a Muslim child, and she was going to convert to Islam, and that's why they killed her, for example.
Right.
Then, a cousin of the Queen phoned and said that they actually had human sacrifices at Balmoral Castle twice a year.
Huh.
And then a illegitimate daughter of King Edward said that, they made a deal with the Nazis, which is why the Battle of Britain was called off at the last minute.
Wow.
And if you're a military historian, everybody always said, if the Germans had only kept pounding one more day at the British defenses, they would have won the Battle of Britain. But suddenly, they decided to start bombing instead. And why did they make this mistake? Well, it wasn't a mistake. They deliberately called off the attack because they made a secret deal with the British royal family. And this is the secret they don't want kept. And the other thing I was told is that Hitler was actually Queen Elizabeth's uncle.
Oh my God.
So, we find out we have these royal families fooling the people, and they keep changing their last names. But if you look at Kaiser Wilhelm...
Wasn't Hitler like a Bronfman or something? I seem to remember reading that, or...
Schicklgruber. But if you look at a photograph of Hitler, and a photograph of Kaiser Wilhelm, a photograph of King George V, they look almost identical.
Wow.
These people marry each other's cousins, so they have very similar, genes. So, in other words, we've been told a huge kettle of lies by these self-appointed kings who ruled us in secrecy for hundreds of years. And much of what we were taught of as history is going to have to be relearned because it's just not true. For example, as a Canadian, I was told that the War of 1812 was the Americans invaded us, so we repelled them. And now I found out actually what happened was the Americans didn't renew the Rothschilds' banking license, and so they invaded the U.S.
Mm.
So, all sorts of stuff that we've been taught is just plain wrong. And
there was a massive revolt against the Masonic Order in America in the mid-1800s, which led to almost the complete collapse of Masonry. And then the Civil War was created so that people would want to join the Masons in order to get preferential treatment on the battlefield to save themselves from being killed. And that was the only way they were able to repopulate the ranks because of how badly this scandal involving the murder of Captain William Morgan had almost completely wiped out the Masonic Order. And that's something that you never hear in conventional history.
Of course. There's so much, basically, you have to, once the Fed is out of the way and you go back to 1913, you'll find out that so much of World War I, World War II were all kind of set up according to a predetermined plot. And another thing I've heard, for example, recently is that, the Titanic. Oh,
I heard this too. Go ahead.
Yeah, they deliberately put all these rich people and royalty who weren't going along with their plans on board, and then they were supposed to all have a chat as they crossed the Pacific, but suddenly at the last minute the J.P. Morgan and the bad guys didn't join the boat, didn't get on the boat, and they rammed it deliberately into an iceberg, and then they, at gunpoint, they prevented them from boarding the lifeboats. So this was like a way of killing a whole bunch of their enemies in one fell swoop.
Well, it was also the fact that this is very highly sensitive, and somebody told me this in confidence, but now that you've said it, I'll just go with it. But they said that the women and children first rule was already chosen in advance so that none of the men would live. And deliberately sabotage, which is why the captain was steaming towards the iceberg at top speed. and that Woodrow Wilson was aware that this had happened, and that's when he said, there exists this power in the world so subtle, so organized, so watchful, that we dare not speak above a whisper when we speak in condemnation of it.
Yeah, and remember there's a novel about a ship called the Titan that sank on its maiden voyage.
Oh, right.
About a year or two before that. Well, so in a way they're announcing their plans to the insiders.
Right, because that's the ritual aspect of it where they like to announce out in the open what they're going to do.
Yeah, the same with, they had a Fox special about a plane flying into the World Trade Center, right, before...
right.
So, these people have really been making fools of us for a long time, and there's going to be an awful lot of anger when this comes out, but I think you have to remember these people are born into that system, and it's enforced through gruesome murder, and so a lot of them had no choice, so we really do have to forgive them once this is out.
I agree with you, and I think that point is largely underestimated in the public, because the bottom line is we can't go back to pogroms like they had when they were good Germans, and everybody says, oh, everybody who's a Jew is the problem, we need to get rid of them. Now, a lot of Germans didn't know that was being done, but certainly there were many within the command structure who did. And
the whole Holocaust thing was a Jew versus Jew thing,
on some levels, yeah.
Yeah, on some levels. I mean, it's not... I think anti-Semitism has been used as a camouflage for a very long time to hide these Satanists, and we cannot let them do that. We cannot let them try to sort of change this into some kind of, Jewish prejudice thing, which is not, because most of the people who are taking them down now are Jews, fighting against them. So it's not, we have to avoid that whole sort of trap and minefield they've created with this whole anti-Semitism propaganda business,
The problem is that the public is not very forgiving, and they're going to turn into a lynch mob if they find out, and they are finding out, the scope of what's been done. I think that's counterproductive because these folks, even though they may have participated in these rituals and done some really horrendous things, they also are in a position where if they were to sort of change their tune and start working on behalf of humanity rather than against humanity, they could be very influential in a positive way in a very, very rapid amount of time.
Well, that's what they're saying, and that's what they're offering us.
Right, because they already have the infrastructure, they already have the financial systems, they already have the corporations. There's all that infrastructure already in place, whereas if somebody were to just say, oh, let's exterminate everybody who's a member of said group.
Yeah.
Then
the other thing is that they have been in charge of planning humanity's future for thousands of years.
Right.
And we can't just destroy that and then have nothing ready to replace it with. We do have to have some kind of system so we can all decide what we want to do next. And we cannot just let there be chaos and disorder, which is what they're afraid of. So we do have to have an orderly transition. Now, I've always used the example of China in 1978. They did not dismantle the state-owned enterprises. They just built a new economy around them to the point where they became irrelevant. And I think that we let these Rothschilds live in their castles and do their stuff, and we'll build new stuff around them until they become, like these relatively minor anachronisms. But they themselves will have an greater wealth than they had before. It's just that the rest of humanity is so much richer that their wealth won't seem so great anymore.
I think the average person who's listening to this and knows about this stuff, in order to keep them from yelling at the computer, let's just say that there are still going to be people in these groups who are going to participate in some black mass rituals and some things that are really nasty. Now, if betrayal is the core of what these groups' philosophy has been, how do we ensure that they not simply change their mind in another year and decide, oh, well, now that we've gotten our enemies out of the way on the American side of things, the Rockefeller faction,